G. Just a quick introduction. My name is Laurel Hebenstreet. I'm a graduate assistant at the University Career Center. And for the month of March, we are capturing different career stories from women across a bunch of different fields, just so we can expose, what do career stories look like, provide some of that like navigational assistance to students as
Mhm.
well. A little bit about our guest, Dr. G. Dr. Ileana Gonzalez is an assistant professor in the Department of Counseling, Higher Education, and Special Education here at UMD. Prior to her appointment at the University of Maryland, she held a faculty position at Johns Hopkins University for over a decade. Prior to her career in higher education, she gained extensive experience in the field of K through 12 education as a teacher and a school counselor, working with Caribbean populations in South Florida. She earned her Ph.D. in counselor education from the University of Maryland College Park in 2013. Her identity as a first-gen college student and daughter of refugees informs her beliefs in equity and access to a quality education for all students, particularly those from marginalized populations. We love to hear it. She has published and
Mhm.
presented nationally on social justice action in schools and in higher education settings, and on multicultural competence and anti-racist training for counselors. Her research interests include multicultural and anti-racist counselor education, cultural competence in counseling and social justice action in urban school settings. She's an active member of the American School Counseling Association, Association of Counselor Education and Supervision, Counselors for Social Justice, and Association of Multicultural Counseling Development. Thank you
Ooh.
so much, Dr. G, for being here today.
Yeah,
It's
thanks.
it's really like quite an honor to have this conversation. I know when I first sent you my email,
Sure.
I couldn't think of a better individual to talk about the higher ed experience and just like navigating those
Yeah.
waters. So yeah, thank you for being
Yeah,
here.
thanks. An honor to be here and to talk about my experience.
Awesome. So, our first kind of question is growing up, what did you think your life would be like today? And what was the career journey like to get here?
Wow. It certainly isn't what it looks like now, that's for sure. I think if you would have gone back in time and told 10th grade Ileana or, seventh grade Ileana, you're going to be a professor someday. I probably would have said you are insane and that's not a trajectory that I wanted to go into. I had a lot of interests when I was in high school. I wanted to study journalism and I wanted to be a journalist and tell stories. I wanted to uh, be work with animals for a long time as well.
Mhm.
But actually, when I went to college, I was an electrical and computer science engineering major,
That's
which
crazy.
is bizarre. Yes, I know. And I sort of did that as a journey of kind of the influence of my father. My father was an aircraft mechanic, didn't go to high school, owned a shop in South Florida where I'm from, and fixed airplane parts. And so growing up, I was always in his shop, around radars and radios, like airplane parts, right? And so I remember as a kid, playing with these parts, building them, like constructing things. And so I figured I'm going into electrical engineering. And I did that for a while. I was pretty good at the mathematics part, but the computer programming piece was just something in the 90s. Now I'm telling my age, but in the 90s, it was really tough for me, the logic of it. I went to a predominantly low income high school, predominantly students of color. And so was never taught to think in those ways. I took AP courses here and there, but really I was never taught to think in this way. So, I mean, I struggled. I really did
Mhm.
struggle. And I really had a semester I think the first semester of my last year. So I was almost there with a degree where I had this like existential crisis where I'm like, what am I doing? I remember
Mhm.
it was one night where all my friends were out and I think it was around my birthday and I'm like sitting in this computer lab trying to make this line in a program go from horizontal to vertical and I had to like write code to make that happen. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, why is this like the kind of life I want to live? No offense to my computer engineering people. You're doing
Right.
amazing things, I'm
Right. It
sure.
takes a special
But
person.
for yeah, absolutely. But for me, it just wasn't my path and it wasn't like a happiness. And I kind of had to talk to myself about like what's my purpose and why am I doing what I'm doing? And I kind of like many, fell into education. I knew I liked kids and I knew I liked learning. Um, and so I remember going to a career counselor at my undergrad and saying, like, these are the credits I have. What can I do with it? I certainly don't want to do engineering. I had taken some minor courses in education, and so the career counselor was like, get an elementary education degree. And I did. And actually that last semester, I think I had to stay like an extra, I don't know, it's a long time now. I think an extra like 2 semesters for me to get the elementary education degree. But I went from taking like these coding classes to like music and art and math manipulatives. And so it was just, I was a much happier person. Completely thrilled by the experience. And I've never realized I can get so much satisfaction from a career by doing it.
Mhm.
Now, my immigrant parents weren't really happy about that,
Right.
because my immigrant parents really wanted me to, for, like many folks, education, unfortunately, isn't, a very career that's looked up on. I disagree completely. I think to be an educator, as you know, it takes a special heart, a special mind, a special passion, and a special type of intelligence. And so my parents were none too pleased, but I graduated and I taught for a while elementary ed. And in the classroom, I really learned that where my passion lied, which kind of circles the square back to like journalism, is hearing people's stories. I really enjoyed hearing about kids' experiences and really understanding like what was going on in their heads. And so that's kind of where I fell into counseling and fell into understanding like what is this thing about counseling. My background wasn't in psychology. It was mostly on the education side. So that's when I entered into my master's degree, and got my master's in school counseling and guidance is what it was called. And then went right back out into the field as a school counselor in high schools in South Florida. I worked with lots of immigrant populations like myself. Caribbean populations. It's just the nature of South Florida geographically. We get Jamaican, Haitian, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Cuban, all these immigrants, and the richness of that diversity in our schools. And so I saw firsthand, like, as a school counselor, like the injustices of these minoritized populations, their experiences in college access, their experiences in access to a quote unquote quality education, and really trying to understand it from a systemic perspective, which is ironically what led me here to University of Maryland. My favorite class in my master's program was multicultural counseling, which ironically I teach now. And I remember calling my professor and saying, where should I go? Like, I'm really interested in learning more about issues of diversity in counseling. He said, well, where it's happening is University of Maryland. That's where a number of great thought leaders and scholars are putting out work. And so I started my PhD in 2005 at the University of Maryland, and graduated and have been kind of on this road ever since. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's sort of my career journey.
Yeah.
But again, I think like many, this is not what my intention was growing up. But man, am I so glad that I'm very blessed to be where I am in terms of the journey that has taken me here. Yeah,
No, you nailed the question perfectly.
good.
And I think it's really, I don't know, nice to hear like that career story is more of like a zigzag than it is like a straight linear path. I think like a lot
Hmm.
of individuals just like get very my like speaking from my experience, I get wrapped up in the it's got to be this straight shot, and I think it's so comforting to hear that it can be all of these different things. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Uh, Gosh, no, I'm just thinking about little Laurel now, and thinking about
Yeah, yeah.
our own career journeys and hearing too like that
It's
pivot.
not linear.
Yeah, and hearing that pivot too, like in the final, the final countdown, so to speak, of undergrad. I sometimes meet with undergrad students and they're like, I need to have it figured out. Like I need to know right this second. And seeing
Yeah.
that it's like it's a process, right? And it's that long,
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
linear.
it's really tough to think about like being 18, 19 years old, and particularly again for for marginalized groups that may not have access to like these kind of batteries and assessments and career interest inventories and or exposure to like the different options that are available. I certainly didn't have a lot of that in high school. So to understand like the world of work and how vast it is and how many jobs are available for people. I mean, I think this generation in particular through social media and online and YouTube, like they have like access to, potentially what could be other job or career opportunities and learning more about that. But I certainly didn't have that. So I kind of just like fell into the right places, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a huge part of what I was hearing in your story too is that want for satisfaction and like the joy of doing the thing and having that be like
Yeah.
of it, which kind of leads us into our next question of what is the most satisfying part of the work you get to do now, and
Yeah.
what of those parts are just like the most appealing parts to you?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's one word, which is impact. I do believe that my purpose, if you believe in that kind of stuff, like my purpose for being here is really to, um, help people that don't get a fair shot in the system for whatever reason. And from an educational standpoint, and my personal experiences, my experiences as a student, right? As a first generation college student, as a daughter of refugees, all my intersectional identities, right? As a woman, to really understand the extent to which like those opportunities were not afforded to me and how those patterns continue to repeat themselves. And so when I'm able to like I'm teaching a class right now to practicing school counselors, and the next class they say, oh, that activity that we did last week, I did it with my staff, and there was this heightened awareness about what we were talking about. That to me is like, I call those better than a paycheck moments. Like, yes, money is nice, money is important, but to me those that's the impact that I hope to have. When I see like work that I've written or research that I've done being cited by other scholars in terms of informing the way that they want to do research, or I go to a conference and I do a presentation, and after a few people come to me and say, wow, like I'm really thinking about what you said. Those little tiny moments to me are that's gonna, what I hope, impact long after I'm gone, and impact the generations that come after me, because I was in that line as well. I was that PhD student going to those conferences and saying, whoa, this is amazing, or reading, I mean, and I still do read those articles, and Lord knows there's a lot of counselor educators out there that are scholars that I look up to, and are, I consider friends and colleagues that I work with that have had that impact on me. So to be able to have that impact on other folks at the higher ed level, but to also
Mhm.
have that folks to my counseling students that are going to go into the trenches, so to speak, and go out there in the field, and to practicing school counselors that are out there working every single day, and eventually, right, the trickle down effect to the kids and the families and the communities that they work for. That to me is my purpose, and why I do what I do, even when it's most exhausting and definitely most challenging. And feeling like sometimes the system, kind of pushes us back, 2 steps forward, 20 steps back. But I really, those are the moments where I'm really most grateful. And again, the responsibility that it is, I tell my students this all the time, this, like, I don't take the fact that I have a PhD very lightly. Like it's a lot of
Yeah.
responsibility and privilege that to have this degree,
Mhm.
and like, what do I do with it? And so I'm not very, I had a lot of experiences where people with PhDs, there's like a power superiority. I try not to approach people from that perspective. I feel like I'm very much of a power down, folks in the room. You don't need a degree to have knowledge and information and share. My parents certainly have barely high school degrees, and they're the smartest people I know.
Right.
Um, and the kids that I've worked with that are 18, 17, like they're way smarter than I'll ever be. So I
Mhm.
really try to model that with folks, so that they can, that's something that they can impact on others, so that people see the value that they have. Unfortunately, in our system, sometimes it is those degrees and that pedigree, and the academy is all about the publications and all that. Great. But to me, the intelligence is the experience, and I think we need to value that a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many things that you just touched on that I think we could really get into. And, I think some of the takeaways from my standpoint is that kind of like, what is the impact and what are your personal values? I know we talked earlier, you mentioned like the battery exams of, career inventories and things like that. And
Hmm.
I think,
Yeah.
it's a good reminder to remind students that and educators to develop access for those things,
Hmm.
and to use them. I know at the Career Center, there's so many times I meet with kids and with students, with adults, young adults, and they ask me for some guidance and I pull out the career inventory assessment. We look at their personal
Yeah.
values and how do your personal values align with the work you're currently doing and what you maybe want to do in the future. And so I think that's
Yeah.
so impactful. And talking of impact too, and I'm familiar with the work you've done as a school counselor and how heavy it can be at times, right? Like it's
Hmm.
not always these moments of levity.
Yeah.
And I think too, talking about high impact positions, this is another one of our questions, how do you manage that work-life balance when you're
Mm,
working in a
mm,
field
mm.
that is, you're driven by the impact, but how do you balance that when it comes to your personal life?
Yeah. Yeah. The challenge with being a counselor is the personal is professional and the professional is personal, particularly in the work that I do when it comes to anti-racist work, social justice work. I try to live and breathe that as much as possible. There is no arrived, and I certainly don't know everything there is to know, and we're all in our journeys of competence. So I really truly believe that the separation of that, like, and the minuscule, yes, I turn off my emails at a certain point in time.
Right.
Yes, some weekends I'm working and my husband's like, stop. You know what I
Right.
mean? Yes, sometimes I try to prioritize, my own mental health and self-care
Mhm.
so that I can, put the oxygen mask on myself so that I can before I help others.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I try to practice those things. But I mean, I think the work-life balance is, I will say just being around people, I'm very blessed that again, I have a really strong familial foundation. I have a really great partner. And I have really great friendships that I've had since middle school, that really call me on the carpet for some things, in terms of knowing me better than I know myself. And sometimes I will be very non-defensive and kind of tune into that energy of, hey, you're kind of wearing yourself ragged, or hey, I see that this is like weighing on you.
Mhm.
It's taken me a long time to get here. I will say that when I was a school counselor, I mean, that's why I burnt out 7 years. I had to leave the field, not leave the field, but leave the position of being a school
Yeah.
counselor at a high school for many reasons. There were systemic reasons, but my own personal mental health was being affected because I didn't employ a lot of self-care techniques that I try to teach my students now. Um, but I will say that it's taken me a long time to get here and a lot of lessons learned about like what matters and what is a priority and how to use my energy wisely.
Ooh.
So like what matters more for to get all these grades out, to get this feedback to students quickly just to get it back to them, or to like spend some time and yeah, it's going to
Mhm.
take some more weeks, but you're going to get that feedback from me and we're going to engage in that dialogue. Or what's more important, to respond to 80 discussion questions or to just be present in the moment, right? And so it's a constant negotiation of like what matters to most, and maybe to some on the that are outside of my brain space might see it as like you're not prioritizing me, or you're not prioritizing my needs. But I think that it's important, and especially in our society where we exist right now, there's a zillion things coming at us that could easily exhaust us in a minute, in a second, and kind of beat us down. So we really, 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 and I'm trying to practice this a bunch, is try to remain grounded in like again our value system, and what is the mission, right? What is the journey? What is like the ultimate goal?
Mhm.
And try not to get too sidetracked in that downward spiral of
Yeah.
all these things are the sky is falling kind of mentality. um but to also honor those feelings, and
Yeah.
validate yourself in those feelings and not try to minimize. Again, I think as women, particularly women of color, I think oftentimes we internalize that minimization of feelings. We're taught as women, go, 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 go. Like, don't let them see you sweat. Keep it together. Like those inherent messages that we get from our mothers, our aunts, our grandmothers, our other women that have had to endure um, this oppression, really. And so I fight really hard, particularly when I have female students, to listen for those messages. Like when I have female students that are constantly like apologetic, like, oh, I'm so sorry. No, do not. No. Like, again, I think that's part of the language of how we internalize that oppression.
Yeah.
So fighting that and being able to stand for sorry, being able to be aware of how that kind of eats at us as well. That was a very long-winded response,
No,
but
but
yeah.
it's a great response. And I think it's capturing, if there's a through line in this conversation, it's that these things don't look one way and are not perfect. And we're not
Mm-mm.
doing it alone either, that there are both years and years of history behind us, and that's informing the way that we conceptualize a career or our boundaries or what work
Yeah.
life looks like. But it's
Yeah.
also, we're doing it in community in the present as well. Like we're
Yeah.
not working just alone, and we have those support systems
Yeah.
that are there for us. And I think that's like so, and those resources, that can hopefully be made available through work, like the work that you're
Yeah.
doing, through like really impactful work that's happening. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
your answers are, I'm learning, right? I'm thinking
Good.
about the
Good.
own way that I think about these questions as well, and taking
Yeah,
it
and
in.
find your people that fill your cup, man. Find your people that fill your cup and don't empty it. Like the people that really fill you and always even when the chips are down are in your corner supporting you, I think is really, really important. And that doesn't have to be in the workspace or the personal space. It could be, a mix of both. I have
Right.
friend groups that are just happenstance friend groups through hobbies or through
Mhm.
friendships, and I have work colleagues that are still from old institutions that I worked at that are still my friends, and we're sharing resources, and I'm still working with them, and because of that, and being around them, and even just engaging, being in their presence, I think is often filling for me of my cup, and allowing me to kind of reflect on where am I now, what does that mean,
Mhm.
what do I need to do to take care of myself so I can keep doing this work as long as I can. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's huge. And I think it's a good segue into our last and final question.
Yeah.
You're already kind of giving that advice to students, but again, to reiterate, many students feel like they have to have it all figured out,
Ugh.
or lost. They know that they don't have to have it all figured out, but aren't quite sure how to get the necessary skills or find the people that fill their buckets. And so I'm just
Yeah.
curious, what would be your advice to a student wanting to do work similar to you?
So for any student that wants to do this kind of work, my first piece of advice is do not go into this profession to try to fix others, because that's not what this profession is about. Counseling, oftentimes people get into this profession because of a deficit in themselves, and they want to fulfill that deficit by quote unquote helping others, and actually you're doing more harm than good by doing that. Day one of counseling class, and you know this very well, I would say, if you came here to fix others, turn that mirror to yourself and look at yourself, because you are the
Mhm.
instrument. So if you're getting into any mental health field, whether it's psychology, whether it's counseling, whether it's social work, whether it's any of that, you are the instrument. And that means that the training and the work that you do, even when it's most painful and uncomfortable, is taking a really good look at yourself.
Mhm.
And so that's the other blessing of this profession is you get a lot of time to really know thyself and be really self-reflective about who you are, what your beliefs are, what your values are, where you come from, your blind spot. I mean, I could go on forever.
Right.
And so my advice is ask yourself, what is your intentionality behind choosing this type of profession or going into it? And the other thing I would say is higher ed, the academy. A lot of people get a PhD because they want the letters behind their name.
Yeah.
Great. But really at the end of the day, like what is happiness, and what is happiness going to look like? And how do you balance that with the need of, like, you have to have a satisfaction in your career. And sometimes money doesn't fulfill that. Sometimes fame doesn't fulfill that. Sometimes the power of having a degree, being called a doctor doesn't fulfill that. So at the end of the day, I think for me, my journey has been, can I take a look at myself in the mirror and still like the person I see, regardless of all the titles, regardless of all the publications, the whatever. And I can say honestly that I'm still okay with this person. Still got a lot of work to do, but I'm okay with the person that I see. And so, sometimes that you can't do that alone. So I always encourage people to go to their own counseling, be vulnerable in that space, and really be vulnerable with that person. That you're going to be able to kind of take a good look at yourself in a really safe space, not with your parent or your sibling or your friend, but really kind of like go deep into those places and say, what do I really want out of life? And I know from a human development standpoint, when you're at that age, it's really confusing to try to figure out, and exactly what you said, Laurel, like, you don't have to listen. I'm going to be 50 and I still don't have it all figured out. I tell my students that all the time. I said, when I retire, my next career, I want to be a DJ. Like, I'm going to be a DJ when I retire. And we don't have to have it all figured out. And the beauty of this life is the opportunity to be able to do things. So try things out that you wouldn't normally do. Take a risk. Do some things that challenge you on a monthly basis if that's possible. And you never, ever, ever know, what that's going to spark in you and where that may take you on that journey. So that's my advice to young people growing up in 2025, which is a very different system than and society when I was 18 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to repeat, I think it's a beautiful way to end our conversation that the beauty of life is the opportunity to
Mhm.
explore, to continue to be a learner,
Yeah.
to know that your story does not really have an end, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of your age, right? I love that
Yeah.
the next career is a DJ. We'll be looking forward to hear the new tracks
DJ
from
Dr. G,
DJ
watch out.
Dr. G. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. So yeah, I want to thank you again for having a
Yeah,
really
my
wonderful
pleasure.
conversation with me. And I think speaking again from my own perspective, I don't want to speak for any other students who are watching this in the future,
Mhm.
but I think this has been a really informative conversation for me. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate that.
Come on by, see me. I'm in Benjamin. Come, we'll chat. I'm always a counselor at heart, so I would love to talk to folks out there that have some career questions and yeah.
Yes. Yes. If you're wanting to connect with Dr. G, we will include her proper contact information in the
Yeah.
description box. And like she said, she's over in the Benjamin building. If you'd like to talk more
Yeah.
about higher education, the school counseling program at UMD, or any
Yeah,
other.
particularly for first gen people, that they're doing this, for the first time in their family systems, or people of color that are trying to navigate, higher ed. Yeah, I can certainly speak to my experience for sure.